your time today, but I would love a chance to introduce Open Air and our two wonderful artists that are here today, and to thank our collaborating partners. So my name is Stoney Samso. I'm the executive director and co-founder with Open Air. We started in 2019, and our headquarters is in Missoula, but we work regionally, and we collaborate with partners across Western Montana and beyond for our kind of cornerstone program to place artists in residence at unique sites for 4 to 6 week residencies typically. So for those of you who are new to the concept, it's essential time and space for artists to create, to discover, to do research, to connect with community. And our work is what's called place-based. And so it happens in unique places. And so our partners here in Butte, we've been working with the Clark Chateau for many years, and as a result, also the Butte archives that we're in. We have connections with IBRC, and it's been just a real treat. Christine, how long have we been collaborating? I think our first year was 2021. So we've been working together for a number of years, and our program brings in artists of all disciplines, from locally, regionally, nationally, and even internationally. And so we're excited to invite writers and performers and dancers and visual artists, interdisciplinary artists to come into these spaces. And we've experimented both with fall and summer residencies here in Butte. Both times a year are unique and fabulous, and it's great to be back in the summertime here. Our program is unconventional in the way that it is hopefully bringing arts into maybe non-traditional art spaces, although the Chateau has deep history in the arts as well as its historical grounding. But we also work with folks that have a focus in ecology, history, culture, to hopefully increase the surface area of where the arts are and increase the community members that connect with the arts. And we do that through free programming, presentations. Jory and Megan are both going to be presenting at the Chateau, and I'll send around some programs, but make sure to grab some of this. And if you're traveling this summer and in the Missoula area, we have a lot of programming going on there as well. We do free workshops, exhibitions, that kind of thing. So, follow our mailing list. I have a little form you can fill out if you're interested in staying connected to our work. Please put your email on there. And one of the things that we do that we love is to, after the artists are done with their residencies, we ask them to share a bit more about their residency. They do it in kind of a written interview form. And they're one of my favorite parts about our program, because you really get to hear and read about what they've discovered and more in depth about their practice. So I'm really excited to be here today. It was a beautiful trip from Missoula, and we'll have some time for Q&A, and hopefully, Megan and Jory can answer any questions you have, and I'm also happy to answer any questions if you have, bigger questions about the program or something like that. We're going to start with Megan here today, and so I am going to read her bio, so I make sure to retain fidelity in her incredible background. Megan, as I mentioned, is in residence at the historic Clark Chateau, and she is a concertmaster of the Wyoming Symphony and a violinist with the Spokane Symphony. She has treasured ties to Montana from her 12 years as co-concertmaster of the Great Falls Symphony, and with their resident ensemble, the Cascade Quartet. Megan is known throughout the state of Montana for championing new commissions by living and local composers, and for her innovative programming in chamber music and solo engagements. And in 2021, Megan became the first woman in classical music to ever receive the Montana Arts Council Artist Innovation Award. Congratulations, Megan. And is a recipient of the Yale Distinguished Music Educator Award. Please help me give a warm welcome to Megan Karls.
Hi, everyone. It's so exciting to be in Butte, and truly it's a dream that I've had ever since I first moved to Great Falls in 2012. I grew up in northern Wisconsin on the border of upper Michigan, and as you know or may know, there's a lot of mining in that area as well. Many of those miners left Michigan and came to Butte to pursue more opportunity, and so when I very first landed in Butte just for a weekend trip, I thought, wow, these are my people, and I want to spend more time here. So it's incredible to be here for a stretch of time rather than just a few days here or there, and to really get to know the community. I'll share a little bit about my background and my work. It's such a treat to be able to do that as a violinist. So often in classical music, there's this like invisible curtain between the concert hall stage and the art supporters. So it's really nice to meet all of you in person. I look forward to your questions. So like I said, I grew up in northern Wisconsin in a really remote rural community, and oftentimes when people think about classical violin or classical music in general, they have this image of a certain type of demographic, a certain type of location, a certain type of person that connects with this kind of music. And suffice it to say, I didn't come from that kind of background. I didn't come from privilege. I didn't come from a classical music background or even a musician's background. And in fact, it took hours of travel each way for me to go to my training from a young age for classical lessons and for youth orchestra. And so I've always had a passion for rural outreach and making what we do in classical music relevant and accessible in every corner of America. So when the job came open, I did my undergrad at a conservatory, and then I did my master's in violin performance at the University of Iowa. And then when the job came open to play in a string quartet in Great Falls, I was convinced that that was the right move for me, that it was basically my dream job in every way, to be in the most remote community in America where I could make a salary playing chamber music. And so from 2012, when I started there, until 2020, I was completely immersed in that world. I had previously lived in Milwaukee and been doing a lot of free improvisation. I played in a noise band, a three-piece noise band with two electronic musicians called Three Arguments Against the Singularity. But when I moved to Great Falls, there wasn't really a community for that kind of music making, and I was so devoted to my job that I was super happy to just be playing straight classical for a number of years. You can imagine that all changed in March of 2020 when all of the concert halls shut down, and I mean, we legally could not work. Being a performer means large groups of people in person, and we fared better in Montana than many of my colleagues in classical music who didn't work for a year and a half, but it was really hard to be kind of separated from audiences, separated from performing. And so I came up with this idea called Decommissioned Solo Violin in Cold War Relics, where I recorded works by J.S. Bach and contemporary living composers in abandoned military complexes from the Cold War around Great Falls and the northern Montana-Canada border. What was exciting to me about this was a chance to connect with new audiences. I loved what Stoney said about open air, trying to bring a wider breadth of arts to people who may not, in my case, show up at a symphony hall, but are interested in, say, the military history of Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls. So I heard about this place. The locals call it the $1 Million Mistake. But it's an abandoned ballistic missile defense structure in a wheat field, as you can see, 36 miles northeast of Conrad. So in the spring of 2020, maybe early summer of 2020, I went out there and I decided to see what it sounded like. All right, so I'm just going to kind of blow through a number of different locations. We don't have time to listen to the entire tracks, but if you're interested, come up and see me and give me your contact information. I can send you the full album. So this was so much fun and so exciting and such a cool acoustic that I decided to see where else I could do some recording. Another place in Montana that's always fascinated me for its military history is St. Marie, which is 17 miles north of Glasgow. It was a base of 7,000 to 8,000 people in its heyday, and now there are 225 people who live in what's left of the base housing. So I recorded a piece in some abandoned base housing. An interesting note about this is that I'm actually suspended over a 10-foot drop sitting on nothing but a 2x4. Some of these projects were pretty stressful. But this is a work written for me by a living composer in Canada. I know, it's tough to just shut it off in the middle of a piece. My former boss in the Great Falls Symphony, our conductor, heard about this project, and he asked me, are you finding any locations with unique acoustics that you might like to have a piece written specifically for? And there's also an abandoned, I think it's an Air Force base outside of Havre, and in there was a racquetball court that also had been long abandoned. As you can imagine, if you play a note in a racquetball court, it just bounces back and forth, just like a ball. And so one note lasts 8 seconds in a racquetball court after you stop playing it. So Grant Harville from the Great Falls Symphony wrote this piece for that space. This one's a little bit metal, so just be warned. There is no power, of course. We'll stop that one there. Like I said, don't be shy. Come say hi, and I can hook you up with the full recordings. So this project was really rewarding to me, most of all because it brought together people who knew classical music, knew my playing from that, and were interested in the violin aspect. But even more rewarding were the people who were interested in the military history and the local history of north central Montana. My favorite sort of anecdote from this was a friend was visiting with an old veteran from up in Havre and showed this person some of the work. And when he watched it, he wept. Since that base is completely abandoned, the chance that he had to have his story told in some way or have his story recognized in some way really meant the world to me. So then eventually orchestras came back to work and life resumed per usual. And in 2022, I got the wild hair to do another similar project. And in this situation, I wanted to work in the state's first historic mission churches. It came out of a conversation with one of our most celebrated composers from Montana, Phil Alberg, who wanted to write a piece for me for St. Peter's Mission and Boarding School, which was about 30 miles outside of Cascade, Montana, south of Great Falls. And there's a lot of history in that boarding school mission and a variety of history, but they also taught violin to almost every single student there. and Métis fiddling was a huge part of the curriculum. So from that conversation, then we decided to work with other Montana composers, Grant Harville again, and also Charles Nichols, who used to teach composition at the University of Montana, to write pieces for St. Mary's Mission in Stevensville and for the St. Ignatius Mission up on the Flathead Reservation. I don't have time to show you those pieces. They're terrific, and obviously the spaces are beautiful and almost all pretty well preserved. Definitely the two on the west side are very well preserved. The boarding school is no longer present outside of Cascade, but the church is well maintained by the locals. But I got a little brave and decided to bring back my improvisation background and bookended the compositions written by Montana composers with my own little musical wanderings. So for that, I went up to the High Line to a place outside of Harlem, just colloquially called the Pink Church.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
She's been there. Wow, I want to talk to you at the end. I've just always been really struck by it. When I would drive home to northern Wisconsin, I would take the High Line back. And, you know, that part of Montana is so wide open, and so the amber waves are truly amber, and the sky is just completely endless, and the wind blows like you wouldn't believe. And so I couldn't get into the Pink Church to record, but I stood outside of it and just let whatever musical sounds bubbled up come through the instrument. Now, this first one is done during the heat of the day. It was about 96 degrees, and the wind was blowing like crazy, and it's not perfect violin playing. You can hear that I'm really struggling to keep the bow on the string, but I think that's part of the experience.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Your sound guy's really good, too.
The sound guy was me. It's, yeah, as a point of note, there there were many men who would reach out during this project and suggest that I needed help doing my own sound, because there's not a lot of women who do that. Okay, so this final one is in the same space, but it's at dusk, and the elemental considerations were the hordes of mosquitoes sucking my blood. Yeah, absolutely. But essentially, the reason that I wanted to share these with you all is I actually came here intending to work again with a composer to premiere a new piece that he was writing for me here in Butte in Our Lady, to premiere it inside the statue in August.
Are you underground too?
Let's talk later. But unfortunately, that composer, who was one of the ones I worked with on this album, passed away unexpectedly just a few weeks ago, and he took the piece with him. So I love what Stoney says about this being a process-driven artist residency rather than a product-driven artist residency, because I'm really here in Butte starting over, and instead of relying on a composer who I admired to make a great piece, I have to figure out how to do it myself. And so it's actually terrifying for me to share my improvisational work with you guys, and I appreciate your listening. So here is the last one I'll play for you, and then do we do questions right away, or do you want to do them at the end?
Maybe at the end.
Yeah, let's do it at the end. Perfect.
In the early 80s. It actually is pink. It really is pink. Up the middle of the curve shows up.
All right, thank you guys.
help me welcome Jory Mickelson.
Thanks again to Stony and Open Air for allowing me to come back to Butte. I've been to Butte quite a bit. My great-great-grandma immigrated here from Ireland and then raised my great-grandmother and my grandmother here in Butte. And then she married someone and moved to Anaconda, so make that of what you will. And I was able to come in 2023 as part of Dear Butte, which is another residency in Butte. And those first 10 days I was working on, I think, my third book. At that time, and that's when I met Christine, who's the director of the Chateau. And so I've always wanted to come back, and residencies are always like a chance for me to pretend that I live somewhere else. And so it was really great, like for my honeymoon, we spent 10 days in northern New Mexico, and I always wanted to go back. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I was awarded a residency for 3 months at the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation in Taos. And so I got to live in a little casita in the middle of Taos on 11 wooded acres during rolling shutdowns. And so it was a very lonely, isolating time, but it was also kind of glorious to be able to see if yes, I could be here too. And so me coming back to Butte, I had originally planned a project that I don't know if I want to do that now. And so, but I get this time and this space to sort of explore what Butte can do. And I tend to use a lot of research and history in my writing, especially as my obsessional projects grow. And so today we're going to have one writer's creative process, a sad explanation of even sadder poetry. And just because I am from Montana, people often wonder when you write, well, where do you find your inspiration? And this quote from Richard Hugo, who is the director of the University of Montana's creative writing program, your triggering subjects are those that ignite your need for words. When you're honest to your feelings, that triggering town chooses you. Your words used your way will generate your meanings. Your obsessions lead to your vocabulary. And I really love this quote. It's from his book on writing called Triggering Town, which is still considered a classic, which is pretty impressive. I think it's in its 900th printing now. But the rugged streets and mining heritage of historic Butte might ignite a first spark. Emotional landscapes and layered stories sort of become the seeds of the work. And two other influences I wanted to acknowledge today were, wrong one. St. Mary Oliver, who said every poem is its own little piece of music. And Mary Oliver gets sort of panned as the nature poet, but she was fantastically difficult person. She swore like a sailor, and she was a chain smoker, all of which you would never get from her poems. And PBS is doing sort of a life biopic of her in August that I can't wait to see if it sort of expands sort of this image we have of the person just from their poetry. And another big influence, I started in visual arts for my first 3 years of school. I was working toward a Bachelor of Fine Arts at the University of Montana in painting. But Georgia O'Keeffe, whether you succeed or not, is irrelevant. There is no such thing. Making your unknown world known is the important thing. And I hold that as I grow in the art of my own writing to be true, but also, Georgia O'Keeffe was the most famous woman painter of the 20th century. And so she could say, I don't care if I have success or not, I'm just gonna paint what I want. But she was also the most well-known. And so, there's a point when you're writing or you're doing any craft or discipline for a long time where you just suddenly, well, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's give it a try and see what happens. And that's probably the most exciting thing to me as an artist, is just saying, let's find out, because we never know until we begin and continue in the experiment. And sometimes it's a total failure, and sometimes it's a joy. But there's surprises and things that I learn in my own process both ways. Whether or not the product or the piece is marketable, because I can write something and love it, and then send it around to journals and get rejections for 3 years, or 10 years, or 100 years. You never know. Writing is if you don't have thick skin, you're gonna get it. So, So from thought to draft, this picture comes from the Montana History Project. Does anyone know what this is? This is the residential mission school in St. Ignatius. This is what the Jesuits used to house indigenous peoples on their own reservations and separate them from their families and their culture. And so my second book, All This Divide, it was really during the pandemic sort of floundering with everything that was happening in the world at the time, as many of us were, and it just felt too close and overwhelming to sort of write about it. And so I started to look back to the 1800s, the past 150 years of history, like how did people deal with similar things, plagues and pandemics, racism, violence, unfettered greed, environmental disaster, and all those issues were happening then, and they were happening now, and so it sort of gave me hope that people survived 150 years ago in sort of unimaginable conditions by our standards today for comfortable living. And it gave me hope that maybe we could survive our own disasters in the present day as well. And it also made me sad because we're still dealing with many of the same issues today. And so part of the struggle of writing the past is how to navigate the stories of history and whose interpretation and who has a right to tell those stories, and especially dealing with difficult things, because the history that gets remembered is often sadness. We just have to look at any of the world wars. It's like we sort of have the VJ Day, but we don't think about everything that led up to that day or everything that happened after that day. And so how to talk about things that happened in the past and were done to people without co-opting their own stories. And I sat a lot in museums and going through collections, and I was not sure how to negotiate sort of these difficult stories. And then one day a museum piece just started talking to me. And if you work in the arts, that makes sense. And if you don't work in the arts, maybe you sound a little crazy. But this voice came to me. And so my solution became to let museum pieces or objects tell their own stories, and that way I wasn't treading on anyone else's story. And so it began in my second book, All This Divide, sort of these stories, these backbones called plunder, looking at different objects like a shovel or a residential school or a pistol in a museum, and how these things told their own stories in the context of what was happening around them. And so this first poem, Plunder Residential School, you'll see it in the big screen, and I will read it on my book. Plunder Residential School. And if you notice, the cover is by Stella Nall, Missoula artist, and her work was in the Chateau 2023 or 24?
I think it was 2023.
2023, and she also is responsible for the mural, The Butte Bison, inside the parking garage on Galena Street. So maybe you've also seen her work there. Plunder Residential School. The children are at last asleep. Like bright brass plates, we've stamped them with new names. Peter, Rachel, Levi, Esther, Aaron, Ruth. Each day's lesson is how to forget a bend of river. Word for willow, your grandmother's hands. We cut your hair, release it easily as smoke. I promise sadness doesn't last if you let it go. Learn this new word, heaven. A better life that awaits you, it is this one. And so I'm going to talk mostly about the poems that I've used research and history to sort of come alongside, since we're at the archives and we're in Butte, which has a deep history. And so this poem, Chicago, I grew up going one summer a year to spend a weekend with my great-grandma in Butte, and she had a house on Gold Street, and I got to sleep in the screened-in porch, and she always made sure to take me on like the trolley through town, and she took me to the World Museum of Mining when it was good and still had the train in it in the 80s. I think that stopped about 89, but this other world of Butte and like this diorama Western town was alive to me as a child in a way. So, we always think about Buttes and miners and unions as the heroes in Butte, and yet unions also have a violent history of their own. And I love, like Death in the West, the podcast, their first season dealt with the lynching and murder of Frank Little that was never solved. But in the process, they sort of peel back like layer after layer after layer of Butte history, which seems crazy. And so, many things came together in this poem, and I'll just read it to you. And it's about the Heron massacre that took place in Heron, Illinois in the 30s. And it incorporates a childhood game and then the painting Heron Massacre by Paul Cadmus. Chicago. It's June. I lay on my stomach amid their graves. The early rain has washed the sky to a clarity of blue. I am remembering how we used to, when we were young, yelling, "Let's see how far we can run between here and Chicago," a word that used to mean almost anything we didn't know the meaning of, like when we'd pretend we were miners crawling beneath the earth, flat on our stomachs with the weight of mountains suspended above our backs, our headlamps dimming, giving the last of our strength to escape the mind's collapse. We're almost there, you'd say. Keep crawling. We're almost to Chicago. In 1922, there was no safety when the strikebreakers were taken into the woods outside Heron by the Union miners. We are always looking for a hero in our stories, a way to make beautiful all our violence. And then we have the Union Hall that got blown up in Butte. I thought that would be a nice touch. When I turn over in the grass and read the names carved in the granite marker, sometimes I wonder if they can hear me as I lay parallel on the earth, we thinking our thoughts and unthoughts together in the early light. Some days I hope they never hear me, when in shame I wonder, how did my life become my life? How little resistance was in me when I gave myself over to brutality. What is the difference between me and the crowd of spectators gathered cheering in Heron Cemetery who watched the men roped together? What is the difference between me and those who beat and shot the bound men begging for their lives? And this is the painting by Paul Cadmus of the Heron Massacre. I am not sure I have an answer. Those alive at the end had their throats cut by a Union man with a pocket knife, their blood washing the cemetery's grass. Those who witnessed the massacre slowly went home. Those left alive did not speak of it again. In the Columbus Museum of Art, Paul Cadmus's painting hangs in silence through the morning and afternoon light. The pigment hasn't a word to say. The dying men, like Christ, are pictured in almost coital release. But here, there will be no rising. Here, before this picture, I have no answer. Those buried around me have been still for more than a century. I wouldn't call it rest. All our stories are only repetitions like light, gathering and dispersing each day indifferent, a variation on the same. Never reaching what we call Chicago, never knowing what this really means. And so Chicago references the 1922 Heron Massacre in Heron, Illinois. I'm sorry, the painting is from the 30s and the massacre was in the 20s. And it's reported one assailant said, "Let's see how fast you can run between here and Chicago, you damn gutter bum," before the mob opened fire on them. And this poem also references Paul Cadmus's painting of the event. So, with all this divide, it was really about Western history and sort of how to answer what was happening now then in the past, and picturing, I had received a fellowship from the Jack Straw Writers Cultural Center in Seattle, and this sort of a cohort of writers across genres to sort of develop our speaking and our interviewing and our presentation skills. But I was with the same 12 writers for a year, and I couldn't keep showing up to events with the same work, and so I was like, oh crap. So I started writing, nothing works so well as a deadline. And so I started writing about art, and because I have that background in art, I started writing about stories that I wanted to hear in art that necessarily didn't get told, and how art comes into life, and how our life sometimes leads into art. And also, as a queer person from Montana, there were so many stories that I did not hear about art history and how queer artists and makers were sort of erased, or even the stories that happened from that. And that can be uncomfortable territory for some people, but in picturing, I worked with a lot of those stories, and so the book is primarily concerned with art and life and sort of what gets told and what doesn't, and how we sort of separate those things out, which led to even the most obsessional thing I've ever done. I was really terrified. I've always been terrified of poets who can write a book-length poem. I thought, what has to be wrong with you to just go on and on? And at the same time, it's really inspiring. I think Bernadette Mayer's Midwinter Day, the legend behind it is she just talked into the tape recorder over the term of a whole day. And then she transcribed it, and it became a book-length poem, like a stream of consciousness. Bernadette Mayer's this great experimental artist and multimedia artist and multi-genre, even a performance artist, who is always changing things. And I love her writing for how challenging or weird or stupid it can be. But she just does the experiment and sees what happens. And so I got commissioned to write a piece in Seattle about a piece of art, and all of us, different artists from different genres and musicians and visual artists, got together and then did a big show and presentation without the audience knowing what the inspirational art was. And then it was sort of all revealed at the end, even to us other artists. And so and I ended up writing about Andy Warhol's Maryland series, the ones that were shot, and but how to describe one of the most cliched images we have when you can't see it. And so it started, I started bringing in what launched her film career, which was Niagara. But this sort of fascination with Andy Warhol has sort of generated this whole next manuscript that I completed just before I got here, completed just before I got here 2.5 years in. And so it's a book-length poem in the voice of an imagined Andy Warhol about his life and his work. And it's very strange, and I don't know if anyone's ever going to want to read it, so I'll start sending it out this fall to publishers to reject promptly, or never hear from them again. That's always great. You're like, did you get it? And you don't hear back. And so that's kind of the joy of being an artist too, is like sometimes people just ignore you because there's so many artists in the world. And I came to Butte wanting specifically to write about a period in Montana in the 1860s, about 1860 to 1864, around some historical events, and sort of extrapolate them into modern times. But again, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this. And so Ken Egan's book, 1864, sort of sparked some of that with some other events that were happening in the state. So I came to Butte with that project in mind, and I don't know if that's going to happen, but this is something I also don't normally do, is I drafted poems in the week that I've been at Butte, and I'm going to show you one draft, and then I'm going to show you some changes I've made. But in refining the draft, the Argentinian poet Antonio Porcia says, "I know what I have given you, I don't know what you have received. And then I found this photo in the Butte archives. This is the big whole pump station. And I loved that someone has given them the fountain, but we don't know what kind of water they're receiving out of the fountain. And also Kelly Russell Agaddon is a Seattle poet whom I quite love. And she said, there's no right way to be a poet. Follow your own instincts and understand why, my own emphasis, understand why you're making the choices you are in the poems. Your unique voice is what makes your work stand out. And so I think that knowing why I'm making choices and moving things around, sometimes it's intuition for sure in the artistic process, and sometimes you make decisions. And so I wanted to show some decisions between the drafts. And I normally don't title it, so all of my poem titles are just placeholders. This is called Anyone Can Hear It. I have a secret, say the grasses, all day to the sun and cloud. I hear it in the horses' hooves, beating the trail, chanting, tell it, tell it, tell it, tell it. I let its repetition sway me. Of a secret, I have two. One bundled in the trunk behind the wagon's bench. The other is, dearest sister, I've noticed how often the swallows rise and fall in the grass, as if meaning to embroider the air, if God only let it. The dress that's come with me is blue wool with dropped shoulders. You know, the one I tack a ribbon to make it fair. Before I left, I stitched PS 121-7 into the sleeve. With every mile comes new names: compass plant, Culver's root, arrowwood. Instead of gaiety, I learn them. I learn them. So that's a draft. And this would be fairly messy. This is like the fourth draft where things are kind of gelling. And then I decided to make some changes to it. And I'll just talk about it real quick so you can kind of see what an artist making changes to their work looks like. I'll read it again. Anyone can hear it. I have a secret, say the grasses, all day to the sun and cloud. I hear it clear as the horses' hooves beating the trail, chanting, tell it, tell it, tell it, tell it. I let its repetition sway me. Of a secret I have two, one bundled in the trunk behind the wagon's bench. The other is, dear sister, I've noticed how the swallow rises and falls into the grass, as if meaning to embroider the air, if God only let it. The dress that comes with me is blue wool with dropped shoulders. Sorry. The dress that's come with me is blue wool. Before I left, I stitched PS 121-7 into the sleeve. With every mile comes new names: compass plant, culver root, arrowwood. Instead of gaiety, I learn them. I learn. And so in this poem, I deleted the line about the woman tacking the ribbon to her dress to make it fair, because the swallow was already repeating the stitching, and then she goes on to stitch, and I left it sort of ambiguous, PS 121-7, because I kind of like that, like the vigilantes have their code, and we never know what that really means, and when we come across history, sometimes there's just things that we don't know what they actually mean, and so I kind of like that mystery, but I didn't want to shut people out, and so, Psalm 121-7, and for all you heathens, I put it at the end of the poem, which is, the Lord will keep you from all harm, he will watch over your life. And so I might include that in a footnote to the poem, or kick that to the back of the book, or make you people break out dusty family Bibles. So like artists are always negotiating, like there's stitching going on, the bird is stitching, I don't need the additional stitching. I don't need the additional details about the dress. I can let you don't need to know it has drop sleeves. You can just imagine a blue wool dress, however you want to do it. PS 121-7, most of you will probably be like, oh, that looks like a Bible thing. So you can just imagine what that is. And then I took out the second, I learn them, I learn them, I learn them, I learn. And that I learn is, in poetry, we call it a spondee, which is a double strike spondee. I learn seems more final and more depressing to me. And so, I took out the second them. But these are all choices that we're making that most people never see, and so we agonize over the colon. The colon will make them finally understand. And so poets have this gift, of like agonizing, like I spent all day taking out like 2 punctuations and putting them back in, or breaking a word on one line, moving it down and being like, nope, I'm gonna move it back up. And so, we have all these, like songwriting is this great thing, but in poetry, we sort of also have the visual contents on the page and how that works with the words or the narrative that we're also building. And so you kind of pick your details and let the rest go. And so this is far from done, but this is set in that world of 1860 that I don't know if I want to work in. And this morning I was working on a poem that was inspired by going to the farmer's market in Uptown this past weekend. And so, how do you bring those together? I don't think we do, but it's the poet's unique voice that makes their work their own. Or any artist, a musician's own interpretation of Bach, a painter's own style that's immediately recognizable. And those are the things that we love and cherish about art that lasts. It's be like, oh, it's their work. Oh, it's Christine's print. Oh, it's Alana's pottery. Oh, it's Megan's violin playing. I like Megan's violin playing over anyone else's. And so, that uniqueness, that person making the art still comes through. And that's what we love. That's why we love Mary Oliver, because some part of her comes through and we hear it and we immediately know who it is. We see a Georgia O'Keeffe painting, we immediately know it's Georgia O'Keeffe, even if we've never seen the work. It's like, I didn't know she painted avocados. I didn't know she painted apples in a bowl. So just like, but immediately we know. And that's what we tend to love and cherish about art.